the empire that ruled the stars. Long before humanity learned to split atoms or dream of distant planets, the stars already had masters. They were called the Valorians. Their empire did not rise through chance or luck. It was engineered, cell by cell, mind by mind, over tens of thousands of cycles. The Valorians believed chaos was the enemy of progress, and they had erased it from their civilization with absolute precision. Across the galaxy, their presence was unmistakable. Vast cities of crystal and living metal floated in orbit around suns. Star lanes glowed with controlled energy, bending space so their fleets could travel faster than light without disturbance. Entire systems existed only to serve the Dominion's needs. Mining worlds, research worlds, breeding worlds. Every Valorian was born for a purpose. Emotion had been carefully reduced to efficiency. Curiosity was allowed only within strict limits. Individual desire was considered a flaw, something ancient and dangerous. The Dominion was perfect, or so they believed. At the heart of this empire lay Axiom Prime, a planet-sized structure encircling a blue-white star. It was not merely a capital, it was a living calculation engine constantly analyzing the future. From here, every decision of the Dominion was made decades in advance. Within Axiom Prime's inner sanctum worked arch-geneticist Kale. Kale was different. Though engineered like all Valorians, traces of something older lingered in him, an echo of the curiosity their ancestors once possessed before it had been edited out. He noticed patterns others ignored. He asked questions the Dominion no longer asked. And that was why he stood now before a holographic projection of a small, unremarkable solar system. A yellow star. 8 planets. 1 inhabited world. Designation? Kale asked calmly. A floating intelligence core responded. Sol system. Primary life-bearing planet, Earth. Species classification, carbon-based bipeds. Technological level, primitive. Kale's multifaceted eyes narrowed. Display survival metrics. The projection shifted. Graphs appeared, wars, extinctions, climate collapse, pandemics, asteroid impacts narrowly avoided. The Valorian observers around him showed no reaction. But Kale felt something unusual. Interest. Clarify anomaly, he said. The core paused for a fraction of a second, an eternity in Valorian computation. Despite repeated extinction-level events, it said, the species persists. Population rebounds exceed predictive models. One of the observers, High Overseer Threxon, emitted a sharp tonal vibration, a sign of dismissal. Persistence does not equal significance, Threxon said. Countless species survive briefly before fading. Kale did not respond immediately. He expanded the data further back, deep into Earth's violent past. Ice ages. Supervolcanoes. Near total collapses. Yet humanity always returned. Change. Run comparative analysis, Kale ordered. Match their recovery patterns against extinct civilizations. The core complied. The results were disturbing. Humans did not simply recover. They adapted faster after catastrophe. Where other species stabilized, humans accelerated. Kale felt a cold ripple pass through his neural lattice. This contradicts genetic efficiency, he murmured. The Valorian genome was optimized for stability. Mutation was minimized. Change was controlled. Humans, by contrast, were disorderly. Imperfect. Yet that imperfection seemed to fuel them. Permission to initiate deeper genetic study denied, Threxon said flatly. Earth is beneath Dominion concern. Kale turned slowly to face the overseer. Then why, he asked, does the future sight engine register 14,000 probabilistic threat scenarios involving the species? The chamber went silent. Threxon's mandibles tightened. That is statistically insignificant, he said. Kale knew better. Axiom Prime's predictions were never wrong, only delayed. He dismissed the council and remained alone, staring at Earth's image. Storms raged across its surface. Fires burned. Cities pulsed with light like fragile neurons. Chaos. And yet, motion. Growth. The Valorians had eliminated suffering to create peace. Humans seemed to suffer endlessly, and still move forward. Kale accessed sealed historical archives, records from before the Dominion's genetic purges. Ancient Valorians had once been like humans, emotional, divided, driven by fear and hope. They had nearly destroyed themselves. So they had chosen perfection instead. But looking at Earth, Kale felt an unsettling thought take shape. What if perfection was not evolution's final form? What if struggle was not a flaw, but a mechanism? A silent alert interrupted his thoughts. A scout probe near Earth had been damaged, destroyed not by weapons, but by a cascading error after exposure to human digital signals. Primitive transmissions. Chaotic code. Yet enough to confuse Valorian systems. XYR Kale stared at the report. Even their communication is unstable, he whispered. Unstable, yet effective. That night cycle, against Dominion law, XYR Kale authorized a covert operation. Human DNA samples would be collected. Not to conquer. Not to destroy. But to understand. As the order transmitted through hidden channels, Axiom Prime's star pulsed softly, unaware that the first fracture had already formed within the Dominion's flawless design. Far away on a small blue planet, humanity slept. Unaware that the greatest empire the universe had ever known had begun to fear what lay hidden inside their blood. The forbidden curiosity. The first human DNA samples arrived at Axiom Prime inside sealed quantum vaults, hidden beneath layers of authorization codes that officially did not exist. XYR Kale watched the containers descend into his private laboratory, a place few Valorians had ever seen. Unlike the sterile symmetry of most Dominion facilities, this chamber was filled with shifting light, adaptive instruments, and experimental arrays that responded to thought itself. If the overseers discovered this project, it would mean termination. Not exile. Not demotion. Erasure. XYR Kale dismissed the risk. Curiosity, once deemed a dangerous trait, burned brightly in him now. He activated the primary scanner. The human DNA unfurled across the air in spiraling holographic strands, glowing with soft blue light. At first glance, it was exactly as the Council had said. Messy. Redundant. Inefficient. Primitive, XYR Kale muttered. Yet as the analysis deepened, the instruments began to slow. Then hesitate. Then recalibrate themselves without instruction. XYR Kale stiffened. Valorian technology did not hesitate. Run integrity check, he ordered. The system responded after a delay. Processing, anomaly detected. Segments of the human genome refused linear mapping. Certain sequences appeared inactive, silent stretches of genetic code that served no obvious purpose. Junk DNA by old human standards. But Valorian science had learned long ago that evolution wasted nothing. XYR Kale isolated one dormant segment and simulated environmental stress. The results made his neural core vibrate. The sequence activated. Not slowly. Not gradually. Instantly. The DNA rewrote itself in response to simulated danger, altering protein expressions, neural response patterns, even cellular repair rates. XYR Kale leaned closer. This is not evolution, he whispered. This is reaction. He increased the stress parameters: radiation, starvation, extreme gravity, psychological trauma. Each time, the human DNA adapted differently. No preset solution. No fixed outcome. It invented responses. Valorian genetics had been optimized for predictability. Humans were optimized for survival under the unknown. A silent warning pulsed through the lab. Unauthorized analysis detected. XYR Kale overrode it. Minutes later, a familiar presence filled the chamber. High Overseer Threxon emerged from a field of distortion, his tall form rigid with authority. You have violated Dominion protocol, Threxon said coldly. Explain. XYR Kale did not turn away from the projection of human DNA. Have you ever questioned why we no longer evolve? He asked. Threxon stiffened. We perfected ourselves. No, XYR Kale replied. We froze ourselves. He finally turned. These creatures suffer endlessly. Disease, war, loss. Yet their genome does not resist change, it invites it. Threxon emitted a low warning tone. Suffering is inefficiency. And yet, XYR Kale said softly, it makes them adaptable in ways we are not. Threxon moved closer, examining the data despite himself. What are those inactive sequences? He asked. XYR Kale hesitated. If I tell you, he said, you will shut this down. Threxon's eyes narrowed. Tell me anyway. XYR Kale expanded the display. Deep within the human genome lay structures unlike anything Valorian science had catalogued. They were not genes in the traditional sense. They behaved more like locks, biological safeguards waiting for extreme conditions. I call it the survivor pattern, XYR Kale said. Threxon recoiled slightly. Speculation. Observation, XYR Kale corrected. These sequences activate only when extinction is imminent. Not individual death. Species-level threat. The lab fell quiet. If humanity is never pushed too far, Kale continued, they remain fragile, divided. But when survival is at stake, they change. To what end? Drexen asked. Kale paused. That, he said, is the terrifying part. He ran a final simulation. Human DNA under total annihilation conditions. The projection shifted violently. The genome reorganized itself, unlocking pathways that enhanced cognition, endurance, cooperation, and aggression simultaneously. Emotional responses intensified rather than diminished. Fear did not paralyze, it sharpened focus. Loss did not weaken, it strengthened social bonds. The simulation ended abruptly. System temperature warnings flared. Drexen stepped back, disturbed. This is dangerous, he said. Such instability would tear our civilization apart. Kale met his gaze. It already has, he said quietly. We removed this from ourselves long ago. Drexen turned away. You will terminate this research, he ordered. The Dominion does not need chaos hidden inside flesh. Drexen vanished. But Kale did not comply. Instead, he stared at the final simulation frame, one haunting result still glowing. When human DNA reached its adaptive peak, it began influencing external systems, altering behavior, innovation patterns, even technology usage. Humans didn't just evolve biologically. They evolved culturally, mentally, and socially, faster under pressure. Kale realized the truth then. The Valorians had mastered control. Humans had mastered response. And response, in a universe governed by unpredictability, was far more powerful. With trembling precision, Kale initiated the next phase. Cross-compatibility testing. If even a fraction of human adaptability could be integrated into Valorian genetics, the Dominion could move beyond its stagnation. He told himself it was for survival, for progress, for the future. But deep within his neural core, a warning echoed, one no algorithm had generated. Some traits were not meant to be borrowed. And some secrets, once uncovered, did not destroy the weak. They destroyed the perfect. The human anomaly. Kale did not sleep. Valorians rarely did, but when they did, it was a regulated neural rest. Short, efficient, dreamless. This cycle, Kale bypassed it entirely. His mind remained locked on the data streams flowing through his private lab. Cross-compatibility testing had begun. The first stage did not involve living subjects. Kale was not reckless. He simulated the interaction between Valorian and human genetic architectures inside a closed quantum environment. At once, the system registered conflict. Valorian DNA sought stability. Human DNA sought adaptation. They behaved like two philosophies trapped in the same body. Isolate response triggers, Kale ordered. The simulation adjusted. Under neutral conditions, the human sequences remained dormant. Inactive. But when Kale introduced stress, even minor unpredictability, the change was immediate. Human genetic fragments surged. They did not overwrite Valorian code. They challenged it. The result was creativity. Problem-solving pathways branched outward instead of narrowing. Decision-making no longer followed singular optimal paths. It explored multiple imperfect ones simultaneously. Kale's neural core pulsed with astonishment. This is impossible, he whispered. Valorian science had spent millennia eliminating inefficiency. Yet here inefficiency produced innovation. He authorized a controlled biological trial. A single synthetic organism, non-sentient, grown for research, was infused with a minimal strand of human DNA. Barely a fraction. Less than 1%. The organism survived. More than that, it improved. Cellular repair accelerated. Neural connections increased. Behavioral unpredictability emerged. Then came the anomaly. The organism began resisting external commands. It did not malfunction. It disagreed. Kale froze. Resistance was not coded. No Valorian construct had ever questioned an instruction. He terminated the organism immediately. The lab fell silent except for the hum of containment fields. Kale felt something unfamiliar tighten inside his mind. Unease. He reviewed historical Dominion records again. Older ones this time from before emotional suppression had been perfected. They spoke of rebellion, of ambition, of leaders rising not by design but by will. All traits humans possessed in abundance. The anomaly isn't biological, Kale realized. It's philosophical. Human DNA did not merely adapt bodies. It reshaped behavior. Against protocol, he escalated the experiment. This time the subject was Valorian, a volunteer selected from a hidden group of researchers who had privately expressed dissatisfaction with Dominion stagnation. His designation was Sale Vorin, brilliant, disciplined, and quietly frustrated. Sale lay within the genetic infusion chamber, his expression calm. "If this succeeds," Sale said evenly, "we evolve. And if it fails," Kale replied, "history forgets us." The infusion began. At first nothing happened. Sale's vitals remained stable. Neural activity spiked briefly, then normalized. Kale allowed himself a rare moment of relief. Then Sale opened his eyes. They were different. Not physically, but focused in a way Kale had never seen in his species. "How do you feel?" Kale asked. Sale considered the question. "I feel aware," he said slowly. "Of myself. Of you. Of the system watching us." That was impossible. Valorian citizens accepted observation without thought. "Do you wish to terminate the trial?" Kale asked. Sale smiled. The expression was awkward and used, but unmistakable. "No," he said. "I wish to continue." Alarms erupted. Across Axiom Prime, predictive engines detected microdeviations, small but spreading. Conversations among researchers changed tone. Questions appeared in restricted channels. Decisions took longer. Choice had entered the system. High Overseer Threxon returned with armed sentinels. "You have contaminated the Dominion," he accused. Kale stood firm. "We have stagnated," he replied. "This is evolution." Threxon pointed to Sale. "That is instability given form." Sale stepped forward, uncommanded. "We are alive," Sale said. "And for the first time I understand what that means." Threxon ordered Sale's termination. The sentinels raised their weapons. And hesitated. Human DNA had done the unthinkable. It had taught Valorians how to hesitate. Within hours, similar experiments, unauthorized but inspired, began appearing across research sectors. Scientists shared fragments. Curiosity spread faster than control could suppress it. The Dominion's greatest strength, uniformity, became its weakness. Kale watched data scroll endlessly, his mind racing. The human anomaly was not a weapon. It was a mirror. And the Valorians did not like what they saw reflected back at them. Somewhere deep within Axiom Prime, a warning pulse echoed through the future sight engine. For the first time in Dominion history, its predictions diverged. Not toward external threat, but toward internal collapse. The experiment that should never have happened. The future sight engine of Axiom Prime had always spoken with one voice. Clear. Certain. Unquestionable. Now it whispered in fragments. Probabilities fractured into branches that refused to collapse into a single outcome. Entire prediction chains terminated in error, something no Valorian system had ever encountered. High Overseer Threxon stood before the engine, his posture rigid, his authority trembling for the first time in his long existence. "This is Kale's doing," he said. "Contain the anomaly." Orders spread through the Dominion like a cold wave. Research sectors were sealed. Communication channels narrowed. Surveillance intensified. But it was too late. The human influence had already crossed a boundary that could not be uncrossed. In Kale's laboratory, Sale Vorin sat upright, no longer restrained. He had not been released. He had simply decided to stand. "I can feel them," Sale said quietly. The others? Thinking. Kale watched him with equal parts awe and fear. "How?" he asked. Sale placed a hand against his chest. "The human sequences don't give answers," he said. "They give awareness. They connect uncertainty to action." Kale understood then that the experiment had passed a point of no return. The Dominion responded with escalation. Specialized genetic containment units, engineered without curiosity, without hesitation, descended upon research worlds. Scientists were detained. Labs were purged. Some complied. Others resisted. Resistance had never been modeled. When a containment unit attempted to shut down Kale's sector, something unprecedented occurred. The technicians refused to execute the order. They argued. They questioned. One even laughed, a sound that had been removed from Valorian expression centuries ago. Human DNA was not spreading through blood alone. It was spreading through thought. Kale made a decision history would later curse. If the Dominion was going to fall, he would at least understand why. He initiated Project Threshold. The project's goal was simple in concept and catastrophic in execution. Integrate human genetic sequences into the Dominion's central biological standard, the template used to create future Veilorians. Not a fragment. Not a test subject. But the species itself. Sale understood the risk. If you do this, Sale said, there is no return. XYR Kale nodded. Evolution never returns. They activated the transfer. Across the Dominion, millions of incubation facilities updated their genetic blueprints simultaneously. The change was subtle, nearly invisible. But the effects were immediate. Children were born who cried. Workers hesitated before obeying. Artists, long extinct, began to appear. And with them came ambition. Competition replaced harmony. Opinions replaced consensus. Hope replaced certainty. Civilizations were not designed to change overnight. The Veilorian social structure began to crack. Political nodes fractured into factions. Military commanders questioned strategic algorithms. Entire fleets paused mid-maneuver, debating orders that had once been absolute. Threxon watched the data in horror. XYR Kale has poisoned us, he declared. An emergency directive was issued. Terminate Project Threshold. Eliminate all altered genetic lines. It was genocide by design. But the soldiers sent to carry out the order had changed. They hesitated. They argued. Some refused outright. For the first time in Dominion history, a military unit defected. Not to an enemy, to an idea. The future sight engine finally stabilized long enough to produce a clear result. Projected outcome: Dominion collapse, 99.7% probability. Cause: internal divergence. Threxon realized the truth too late. The Dominion had been built for perfection, not resilience. Human DNA introduced adaptability, but adaptability required conflict. And the Veilorians had never learned how to survive disagreement. XYR Kale stood alone as his laboratory shook with distant unrest. We wanted their strength, he whispered. Outside, stars dimmed as energy grids failed across entire systems. Sale looked at him, not with accusation but with understanding. They survived because they suffered, Sale said. We are suffering now. XYR Kale closed his eyes. The experiment that should never have happened had succeeded beyond measure. Humanity had never fired a weapon. Had never known the Veilorians existed. Yet their hidden genetic secret had begun to dismantle the greatest empire the universe had ever known. And the collapse had only just begun. Collapse of the perfect order. The Veilorian Dominion did not fall in fire. It fell in silence. Star systems that had obeyed Axiom Prime for millennia began to act independently. Energy relays flickered as local governors delayed decisions, arguing over resource allocation. Transportation lanes clogged, not from sabotage but from hesitation. Hesitation had never existed before. High Overseer Threxon convened the last unified council in the Hall of Continuity. Once, its decisions had shaped the fate of galaxies in seconds. Now voices overlapped. Opinions clashed. Accusations echoed against crystal walls. This chaos must be purged, Threxon declared. We must return to order. But order required obedience. And obedience was gone. Reports streamed in faster than they could be processed. A research world refused genetic cleansing orders. A fleet command rejected algorithmic targeting. Civilian populations protested forced conformity. Words like choice, identity, and meaning appeared in official transmissions. The Dominion's predictive models failed completely. They could not account for hope. On Axiom Prime, XYR Kale moved through darkened corridors, systems shutting down behind him as energy grids destabilized. He was no longer hunted. There were too many crises for that. He reached the future sight engine chamber. The star at its center pulsed erratically, its light no longer synchronized with the machine's calculations. XYR Kale accessed the core. What do you see? He asked. The engine responded in fragments. Multiple futures. No dominant outcome. Control variables exceeded. XYR Kale smiled sadly. That is life, he said. Elsewhere, Sale Vorin stood before a gathering of altered Veilorians, scientists, soldiers, citizens. They did not kneel. They did not synchronize thought. They listened. We are not broken, Sale said. We are becoming. Some disagreed. Arguments erupted. Emotions flared. Yet none left. This too was new. The Dominion fractured into countless autonomous regions. Some tried to restore the old ways. Others embraced change fully, rewriting laws and identities overnight. Conflict followed. Not war in the Veilorian sense, but struggle. Resources were mismanaged. Infrastructure failed. Systems once perfect could not withstand improvisation. The Empire's greatest weakness revealed itself. It had been designed to never fail. So it had never learned how to recover. Threxen issued the final decree. Initiate core collapse protocol. If the Dominion could not be controlled, it would be erased. Its knowledge sealed, its influence ended. Axiom Prime began to destabilize. Exwire Kale felt the tremor through the structure. He knew what Threxen intended. He opened a secure channel to Sale. It ends today, Exwire Kale said. Sale nodded. Then let it end honestly. As systems shut down across the galaxy, entire populations were cut off from central support. Some worlds descended into chaos. Others adapted. Those with more human influence stabilized faster. They formed councils, shared leadership, accepted imperfection. Exwire Kale watched the data with wonder. Their strength was never dominance, he whispered. It was endurance. Axiom Prime star flared violently. The capital of the Dominion, the symbol of absolute control, began to tear itself apart. Threxen stood alone in the Hall of Continuity as evacuation alarms blared. We were perfect, he said to the empty chamber. No, a quiet voice replied behind him. You were finished. Sale had arrived. Threxen turned. You've doomed us, he spat. Sale shook his head. No. We just learned how to live too late. Moments later, the hall collapsed into light. Across the galaxy, the Veilorian Dominion ended, not with conquest but with transformation and ruin entwined. And on a distant blue planet, humanity continued its fragile existence, unaware that its hidden genetic secret had just rewritten the fate of the stars. Humanity never knew. Earth turned quietly beneath its clouds. Oceans rose and fell with ancient patience. Cities pulsed with light, noise, and restless ambition. Humanity argued, loved, fought, and dreamed, completely unaware that an empire had just ended because of them. No sky burned. No warning came. The fall of the Veilorian Dominion left no scar upon human history. Yet far beyond Earth's fragile atmosphere, the galaxy was changing. Former Dominion worlds drifted in isolation. Some collapsed entirely, their people unable to adapt to uncertainty. Others, those touched most deeply by human genetic influence, survived through struggle. They formed alliances instead of hierarchies. They debated instead of obeying. They failed and then tried again. Exwire Kale watched these developments from a remote observation station, one of the few structures to survive Axiom Prime's destruction. He was no longer arch-geneticist of anything. Titles had lost their meaning. He was simply a witness now. The irony weighed on him. The Veilorians had studied humanity believing them weak. Yet humans had lived every day under conditions the Dominion would have classified as unacceptable. Uncertainty, mortality, loss. And still they endured. Exwire Kale examined long-range surveillance of Earth. Humans faced climate instability, political fractures, technological risks of their own making. Yet alongside every crisis, innovation flourished. When threatened, they did not unify perfectly. They adapted imperfectly. And that was enough. A transmission reached Exwire Kale from Sale Vorin, now part of a small coalition of surviving Veilorians. We are changing, Sale said. Slowly. Painfully. But truly. Exwire Kale felt something unfamiliar tighten in his neural pathways. Pride. Do they know? Sale asked. The humans? Exwire Kale shook his head. No. And they must not. Their strength comes from struggle, not worship. Sale understood. Across the galaxy, whispers began to circulate among emerging civilizations. Records of the Dominion's fall spread, not as warnings of human aggression, but as lessons in resilience. The humans were not conquerors. They were catalysts. On Earth, a child learned to walk after falling again and again. A scientist failed 100 times before success. A city rebuilt after disaster. Each small act mirrored the same ancient truth hidden in their DNA. Survival was not about perfection. It was about refusing to stop. Exwire Kale recorded his final observation. The universe did not defeat the Veilorians, he said. We defeated ourselves by fearing change. He turned his gaze back toward Earth one last time. May they never lose what makes them unfinished. Centuries passed. New civilizations rose where the Dominion once ruled. None dared build an empire of perfect order again. They remembered the Veilorians. They remembered how an empire without suffering had shattered when faced with freedom. Humanity, meanwhile, reached outward, slowly, clumsily, bravely. Their first interstellar probes carried no weapons of dominance. Only questions. When humans finally encountered other species, The stories had already preceded them. Beware, some said. They endure. Others said something different. Learn from them. The secret hidden in human DNA was never about destruction. It was about becoming. Humanity did not survive the universe because it was strongest. It survived because it changed. And the universe, vast and unforgiving, would never again underestimate a species that could fall, rise, and adapt, again and again, without ever needing to be perfect. Long after the Valorian dominion faded into legend, the galaxy settled into a cautious peace. Empires no longer chased perfection. Civilizations grew slower now. Messier. More fragile, but harder to erase. They remembered what had happened when absolute control met adaptive chaos. They remembered humanity. Xwararkale's final records survived as fragments, scattered across forgotten data vaults and drifting archives. Among scholars of many species, one passage was repeated more than any other. Do not ask why humans survive. Ask why the universe keeps failing to stop them. On Earth, centuries passed. Humanity stumbled forward as it always had. They nearly destroyed themselves more than once. Artificial intelligence crises. Ecological collapse. Wars that pushed civilization to the brink. Each time, extinction seemed certain. Each time, something changed. New ideas emerged under pressure. Old systems broke and were replaced. Humanity did not unify, but it coordinated just enough. The survivor pattern activated again and again. Not in blood alone, but in culture. When humanity finally cracked faster than light travel, they did not arrive as conquerors. They arrived as survivors. Their first interstellar encounter was with a fractured Valorian descendant society, one of the few that had endured the collapse by embracing uncertainty early. The Valorians recognized humans instantly. Not by appearance. By behavior. Humans argued during first contact. Disagreed publicly. Made mistakes. Corrected them. Laughed in tense moments. Felt fear and kept going anyway. The Valorian envoy watched in silence, then spoke words that would echo across the galaxy. You are exactly as we feared. The human diplomat smiled nervously. And exactly as we hoped. When humans eventually learned the truth, that their DNA had ended an empire without a single shot fired, they reacted in the most human way possible. They argued about it. Some felt guilt. Some felt pride. Some dismissed it entirely. Then they moved on. Because humanity had never defined itself by what it destroyed. Only by what it survived. Xwararkale's final message, recovered centuries later, was etched onto the galactic archive in dozens of languages. We sought perfection and lost our future. They accepted imperfection and inherited the stars. And so the universe learned a lesson written not in conquest but in endurance. Humanity was not dangerous because it was powerful. Humanity was dangerous because it adapted faster than fear. Because when pushed to the edge of extinction, humans did not become monsters. They became more human. And that was enough to outlast empires.